Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new episode of the X Button, Season 4, Episode 40. And also, fun fact, Episode 171 total. So, a little palindrome here. Really special numbering here. I'm your host, Alejandro, with me, making his return to the show after the special episode we recorded all the way back in October 2023, right before Spider-Man 2 and Mario Wonder were about to come out. Richard Hoeg from HoegLaw, also our official kind of member of Last Stand Media and also member of the Bitcast. How are you doing, Rick?
I'm doing okay. Yes, I believe my title at Last Stand is paid contributor.
Yes. Kind of like I'm a direct contributor to Season Gaming. So we all know about that contributor life. So welcome back, Rick. It's been a while because I know it's been kind of like a year being like, hey, let's see when I can get you back in the show to maybe talk games or anything. And obviously you've been you're slowly getting back into your group and slowly getting back into kind of you, especially how you told the story about you surviving the stroke and going on your recovery journey, and how this has been like your last year was like physical like recovery, and this has been more like the mental recovery. So it's been like really cool seeing you back, like seeing that progress as someone that watches you so often as a Bitcast member, and also when you pop up over at LSM. So really excited to have you back here to get to talk about a favorite topic and gaming genre of yours. So plus
I appreciate
plus other stuff. So because I know you sometimes love when you can just talk games and not having to do stuff that kind of fits in your wheelhouse, even though that's kind of like what makes you so interesting in the gaming space. So thank you so much for making the time here, especially because you're about to have a very, very busy day also in a couple hours. So.
Yeah, it's an exciting one. No, I'm happy to be here talking about games. It's been a great year for games, no matter what anybody tells you.
Yes,
including me if I'm not feeling good on a given Sunday.
I know. That's what I've always been saying. I can't wait to talk about specifically for one of the topics is specific to that. But yeah, before we get into that, this is just a reminder that this is the X Bottom Podcast, Escape Gaming's gaming podcast that posts every Fridays from 10 a.m. onwards, God willing. Available on the YouTube channel Escape Gaming, as well as most audio services around the world, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the like. You can find links in the RSS feed at tinyurl.com/escapegaming. If you enjoy our show, give us a like and subscribe. And also, based on when this episode is gonna be going live, Rick here is gonna be doing a live Virtual Legality, which is his show, where a very informative show in regards to the Pal World patents, right?
I am, yes, later today. So
yes.
By the time this goes up, should be available on my channel.
Yes. So I'm definitely gonna link that in the description below, so you can go if you're so interested to hear about like the interesting nuances of legalese, especially from non-US patents, right? In this case, or in Japan. So Rick, time to talk about what we've been playing. So obviously, this is gonna be like for anyone that listens to the bit, because it's gonna be slightly follow-ups to some of the games you mentioned there. So, and those games were Dragon Age, The Veilguard, and Slitterhead. So for me, like I haven't played Slitterhead, and for Veilguard, I'm waiting on my PS5 Pro that's arriving in 7 days from today. I played just the beginning just to kind of get a vibe for that. But Rick, I know you've been going through the journey on that one. I want to hear more from Veilguard. Where you are at? Like, where's the temperature check now?
I'm pretty good on Veilguard. I still describe it as liking it rather than loving it. I would love to love it. BioWare is a company that has made some of my favorite RPGs in the past, not for a while now, obviously. But I would love to just be able to come out here and give a party for Veilguard. Unfortunately, I'm not there at this moment in time, but I do like it. And I like it better than some of the games that got a lot of positive press for BioWare. I like it better than Inquisition. I like it better than probably Mass Effect 2, which it clearly borrows a lot of its structure from. And so I'm happy to say that. It's in a bit of the doldrums for me right now. I'm in the middle to late Act 2, kind of the connector act between the intro and what I am told from reviews is a strong ending. I obviously haven't gotten there yet. But that place, just like when you're in the middle movie of a trilogy, can get a little bit long-winded. And that's what I'm seeing right now in Veilguard. But I'm going to see it through. Going to keep playing it to the end. And honestly, it's better than I thought it would be, which is nice.
Yeah, especially because you had massive concerns going into this one, especially with where you've been with BioWare, like just from what I've heard about your thoughts on BioWare games in recent times. And obviously you mentioned Mass Effect 2. Obviously, you know, Mass Effect 2 is my favorite Mass Effect of the three. Like that's like your least favorite, specifically from plot perspective, how it's more character driven than a plot thing. How character driven or plot driven would you say Veilguard is, especially with the Mass Effect 2 comparisons? Because I have heard it's very kind of like plot is like, yes, they're in the background, but there's a lot of like interactions with the parties and characters and doing their loyalty stuff. Would you say it's pretty accurate saying that?
Yes, that's very accurate. The plot is non-existent as a plot. There are evil cartoon villains, and we're putting together a team to go get them at some point. And then that putting together a team in the intro is literally putting them together. In the second act is fixing up their personal issues, their qualms, their psychological traits, whatever it might be, so that in Act 3, presumably, again, haven't played it yet, you wind up going after the big bads. And so it's very much that kind of Mass Effect 2 structure. But I have not minded the characters as much as some people on the internet have. And so I think it's a little bit too direct. It's a little bit cartoony for my liking. But as you know, if you know me, and I know you do,
yes,
I don't mind the Saturday morning cartooning of RPGs. I just mind this kind of half in, half out. It's serious, but it's not kind of thing that Veilguard has a problem with tonally. But overall, the combat is good. The graphics are awesome. I know that character art has gotten its own mentions online, and I think that reasonable minds can differ. Your mileage may vary on whether or not that particular bit of art looks good to you, but the environments, the actual way that the game feels solid, and the resolution and the performance on consoles, over and above. It's probably one of the prettiest RPGs I've ever played.
Which says a lot, especially with how janky the BioWare RPGs tend to be. Even just going back to like Inquisition, which is it's funny that you mentioned the Inquisition, because Rick, that was like one of the biggest, like, how the hell did this get Game of the Year back in 2014? That was like, that always has been like my thing with that game. And not that I say that it's bad, but it had so much roughness to it that
Inquisition is not bad, but it's not like a fully fleshed out concept for a game. And I think it won in 2014 primarily because that was a softer year, and you could just consolidate around one of the big names releasing something that was good, if not great. And so, yeah, it's a weird award winner, but there are occasionally some of those in the Game Awards.
Yeah. Many times has happened. And what I find funny is that I always, my equivalent of Dragon Age Inquisition winning is like when back in the Oscars, Shakespeare in Love won against Saving Private Ryan. Is because when people hear about what were the Oscar winners, like when they see a list and they see Shakespeare in Love, it's like, how did that get there? And then when you see Inquisition next to a Witcher 3, a like Zelda it's a Zelda Breath of the Wild, or an Elden Ring, or many of the bigger names, seeing Inquisition there's like, why is that there? It's always funny thinking about that and just how janky it is. Like, it's not a game that's hold up well in the slightest. I tried going back to that recently, just be like, man, I haven't played Inquisition in like a while. Let me see. It's like, oh man, this is whole right trigger the game, right? It's like, the stability of this thing is rough. And at the very least, like in what I played with Veilguard, at least it's a little more confident in its combat, or at least what it tried to be, instead of being like, let's serve two masters with what they try to do with Inquisition. So, and
Veilguard is 100% the best combat BioWare has ever done. End sentence. Now, that doesn't make it the best combat in video games, but it's the best BioWare has ever done, and that's a big deal.
Yeah. And I can't wait to see more of it when I get the Pro, especially since Ainsley Bowden from Season Gaming, he specifically mentioned that he noticed the visual difference playing in performance mode. And I'm like, I like playing in that mode. I have a massive 65-inch TV, like literally staring at me. I look at things very close. So when performance mode is a little grimy, let's say, like it's I actually notice it, so I'll probably notice it too. So I can't wait to see like if it does make a difference, as I have a little bit of an eye on that. So Rick, and moving on from Veilguard, like Slitherhead was like your surprise, like I'm playing this from this last Sunday's Bitcast. How's still been treating? I've been watching Brad Ellis from LSM like to stream a little bit of it.
Oh, is he playing it? That's great.
Oh yes, it's a weird game.
This was not a game for me. This was not on my list. This was not thing I was watching for. I got it because I was intrigued by kind of the description of it when I finally got to take a look at it. And it is by far my surprise of the year, especially if we assume that Balatro is now a known commodity, when that was a surprise when it originally came out. Yeah. But Slitherhead is first and foremost, and this won't surprise anybody that knows me, a kind of story-based game. It is really interested in what if monsters or aliens or demons or whatever the heck they are just started infesting the streets of a city, and like how would that be dealt with? And especially, how would it be dealt with if you were some kind of ghost that could possess people? Or not a ghost, maybe you're a pathogen, maybe you're an alien, I don't know. And then how would those missions play out? And because of those different elements, the missions play out differently than I had anticipated. It's not just beating up monsters in the streets. For the most part, you're possessing bodies that have special access to areas or can get information that you couldn't otherwise get. And you're trying to bounce through difficult to reach buildings by kind of possessing people at the far distance of where you can see. And so it's a kind of puzzle environment game, but really based on the story of what does it mean for these monsters? What are they? How would people react to them? What might be their agendas? What if there is a schism between monster groups? And like all these various things that I like to think about when I'm talking about speculative fiction, sci-fi, or fantasy, which is like, okay, this is true. This weird thing. These sea creatures that pop out of people's heads are taking over human beings and pretending to be human beings. How would they infiltrate society? What would that look like? Okay, yeah, they'll hit the mafia, they'll hit the brothels, they'll do these things that are under the radar from the police. But then what after that? And like all these various things that I love so much about fiction is in Slitterhead. And yeah, the gameplay is maybe not as tight as you would hope in 2024, but it is easily as good as anything you might have played 5 or 6 years ago. And so I have a pretty generous kind of allowance for does the job, right? Gets the job done. I'm not hating my time with this. You give me a story and a plot and characters that I'm interested in and something approaching competence in gameplay, and I'm okay with that as my recipe for success.
Yeah, and this is something like I know you mentioned it very like often sometimes about sometimes the critic class or like the critical class or the people that review stuff nowadays. And I feel like, especially with what I've noticed, like the things that get the most praise are like the cleanest, the sanded offs, kind of like pristine products instead of the more interesting products that then when you like go into like a Slitterhead that got like in the average scores in the 60s and all that, but then when you play something, it's like you get a level of energy that used to be very accepted back in like the PS2 era games. And obviously this game is from the director of the original Silent Hill, the Siren series, and Gravity Rush, which when you look at those games, those were very quirky, unique horror style. Obviously Gravity Rush not a horror game, it's a more a unique perspective for like an action platformer, but it was like trying to push something interesting that doesn't look like what's out there. And I feel like from what I've learned of you is like you tend to like, because you want that new, you're willing to at least kind of take a little bit more of a risk to support that instead of kind of like the safe over the shoulder third person action game has been sanded to the pristine sheen. So that's basically where Slither has landed for you, right?
Yeah, I take flyers. There's no question. If I see something that is interesting and it's not like objectively broken, like the thing I go and read reviews for when I'm staring at my PSN or my eShop or whatever is, does this thing function? Does it brick anything? That kind of thing. Because I'm not that interested in what this person thinks of this thing that I now think is interesting from watching the video on the trailer or whatever it might be. But I am concerned of, does it run on my Switch? Does it do these various other things that I need it to do to actually function as a video game? And yeah, I get into it a little bit with my reviewer friends because I think some of them tend to think more highly of their position in the pantheon here, which is fine. If I were putting in that work and time, I would want to feel that too. And I get that. But for me, I would rather see more novelty, more variety in games, in all my media, really. I think this polishing off effect happens in movies, happens in TV, happens on streamers, does all these things. I would rather have the crazy director trying his best, more megalopolises and less, Disney Star Wars, as it were. And so Slitterhead is that to me. And honestly, it reminded me enough in certain aspects of the old game Prototype.
Yes.
I wound up downloading the PlayStation 4, like, I guess that at that point was a remake of Prototype. Downloading that, and like for 2024 standards, it's junk.
Yeah.
As combat, but it's still very interesting in how it's interacting and what isn't quite an open world, but also is an open world at the same time. And to me, that game Prototype wasn't awesomely received, but it wasn't killed as much as something like Slitterhead is now. And I would like to see at least a little bit more generosity towards game projects like that.
Yeah, because I always love going back to those like 2008, 2009 era open world games when people still were trying to figure it out. Like it was not as pervasive a genre as it is, and it felt like at least we were watching like the creativity be like not as lambasted, but at least trying to be embraced, while obviously criticizing things that it wasn't doing well. Like in Prototype, like visually, that game definitely was rough even back then, but the level of fun, yeah, especially because the remake was a remaster that we got on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. So those were like what Ryan McCaffrey at IGN likes to joke as the file save as remastered. Of like, yeah, let's just copy and paste, like crank out resolution, put the game out there. That is that Prototype game. But we have lost sight of just pure fun and creativity in most games. I would feel that I am not fully against like prestige pieces, but I feel like the gaming industry critical class and a lot of people have gotten so obsessed with just focusing on that and forgetting the vastness of creativity that gaming's supposed to have. And that's why, like, Slitherhead, I'm waiting for like a sale, because I just bought I had to buy a console again to continue like doing a review that I recently finished, and it's already published. But it's like, I'm in my interest in what I've seen, like from what Brad Ellis was playing, it's like, this looks like my jam. It's like, I like that it's so unique, and also it's properly priced. I think it's like 50, he said. Like, it's not even,
it
like
is 50, yeah. And I don't blame you for waiting for sale. I will say that I think that there is enough content there to justify it as a game. There's multiple characters with multiple different kind of I'll call them a skill tree just for the ease of conversation. But it's different things that you can change about the way that they function, and it's a game you haven't played before, and like really you haven't. Now, if you're watching Brad, you at least have some acknowledgement of what it is.
Yes.
But sitting there and getting this kind of spirit radio loading screen and talking to people in these weird cutscenes was a real revelation for me, and I was very happy that I took the flyer on buying it. So yeah, Slitherhead, Veilguard also, despite what you may hear, is both better than it should be and maybe a little worse than BioWare's best. But it's been a good couple of weeks for video games, in my opinion.
Yes, and like people usually say, the truth is always somewhere in the middle. So outside of the hyperbole. So, and now, Rick, you just started playing this one. This has been my jam for 35 hours over the last 2 weeks. Dragon Quest III HD-2D, a game that actually came out today as when we're recording. A game I actually got really early. Like one of my rare times over at Season Game that we got a game so early, and I had to kind of like separate my playthroughs for a preview and kind of like the full playthrough. And
I actually made my work list of things I had to do today, which was get a couple hours in on Dragon Quest 3 before I talked to Alex.
Yes.
And yes, for folks that don't know me, Dragon Quest is a game that I go back all the way to the beginning with, as it was Dragon Warrior here in the United States. And I love this series. It is my JRPG comfort food series. This is where I learned about what grinding is. As a kid, I would wander outside the town until I felt comfortable enough to try to make it over that bridge and fight the next level of demons or monsters or whatever it might be. And I remember fighting golden dragons. I remember doing all these various things when I was a kid. So bringing that into voice acting and Octopath Traveler kind of HD-2D approach to graphics is exactly where I live my life. It's where I want to be. I played, I think, probably 2 or 3 hours of it so far. I know this game, and so it just, on what I've seen already, I know it's going to be one of my favorites of the year. It's exactly what I want out of a Dragon Quest game, out of a JRPG, really. And I wanted to say this. I was thinking about it while I was playing it. It's interesting to me, like with Veilguard, that I object to certain of the Saturday morning cartoonness of it, and the way they present some of the characters is very bluntly direct. There's nothing more bluntly direct or Saturday morning cartoonish than Dragon Quest. Yes. So a lot of reviews, a lot of your feelings on games or any kind of media really does live with what your expectations are for a given piece of media. And like Dragon Quest, I don't want it to be deep or talk about the gray morality of human existence or what have you. It's exactly what I want it to be. Dragon Age, BioWare in general, I think has had some more success with perhaps more in-depth full characters, more kind of granular discussions of what it means to be a person and morality and all these various things. And so when Veilguard, to be honest, kind of goes in a Dragon Quest direction, it feels like it's missing a little something from what we know BioWare is capable of. Versus Dragon Quest, it's exactly what I want. Here, have a sword, Your dad died a while ago. Go fight the bad guy. The world is yours. Have fun.
Yeah, pick your party. You name your party, like you decide what you want and just go. Like
name them family members. Don't let your family members die. It's great.
Yeah, go to it. It's so refreshing. That was one of the things that struck me the most. Like the JRPG genre, I feel like in modern times has gotten so obsessed with like the long preamble, the slow build up for things, and playing something like Dragon Quest 3 HD-2D that you are on your birthday, you get to set up your name, like the personality. I love did the spirit was the spirit blunt with what you picked? Because it's hilarious.
Yes, like it's very mean. I was actually thinking, wow, this is meaner than anything I've played in video games of late, because it's telling me like bad things about my personality and whatnot. It's like, that was a series of yes or no questions. You back off.
Yeah. And by the way, in your choice of words, did you get to play as a dragon? Like briefly, because I had a friend that I asked him and he didn't, and I did based on some of the things that I answered. Did that happen to you?
No.
That's so interesting. Like, what did I answer that eventually when you answered, she says like, I have one final question for you, and then it fades in, and then you play as one of those dragons as you're kind of going or like walking around like random town. I was like, okay, this is weird, interesting, and now you're the second one that hasn't seen that dragon from what I played. That's like,
I did not do that. No.
Yeah. and I answered myself to try to be a noble. I like playing the Paragon character. I'm not like those that was like, I'm gonna go full on jerk, which this game, based on the answer, you can basically do that. And also based, if you're a jerk, I think it affects your stat builds based on that, which I found really interesting. More depth in like the malleability and the way that you can build up characters, despite the fact that you're not like always individually like building stats. It just happens automatically. It's just like those things that can affect that in very subtle ways that you may not know. But I find that really interesting, that I haven't met anyone else that played with that that has played as that dragon after the answer. That's fascinating. But it's just so funny. It was just so jerk. But then, oh yeah, go to a king. Yeah, here's your goal. Go to the tavern for your party. Go. Like, that's like probably 10-15 minutes tops, I think, and then you're off the race. It's like, wow, this is really refreshing. Like very, very refreshing. It's not like it's not wasting your time right now. Like early on, like at least it's not wasting your time currently. The world is there. I would say like I did use a guide, because there was a few parts like back in the day, like, would old guides work? And it turns out like the game is very faithful. Like guides like go point for, if you remember this game, Rick, from when you played it back then, it's gonna be the exact same game, just with the prettier art style.
I am positive I will not remember the middle of this game.
Yeah.
It's been a number of years, but I will tell you that Dragon Warrior, which was one of my first RPGs, was also the first and maybe only time that the Hoeg family called into the Nintendo Power tip line.
Really? Oh, yes. Wow.
And this was my father that was playing it for me, or because he wanted to play it. I don't remember the specifics, but we couldn't find the Sun Shrine or the Sun something.
Yes.
And in this particular instance, in Dragon Warrior 1, there was, when you leave town in Dragon Warrior, there's usually a little sound of going downstairs, and you're out into the world map. And on this particular town map, there was one step that you could take so that you could walk around the outside edge of the town area to get to this dungeon that was hidden. And we couldn't find it. And we called the Nintendo Power tip line, and they're like, yeah, you do this. And my father was so happy. This is one of my kind of foundational video game memories, is Dragon Warrior 1 and walking outside to get this sun. I want to say it was probably like
it's like a sun amulet. That's all I'll say. It's like a certain amulet, because it's also in this game. It's because the preamble to 1, like with Dragon Quest 3. So one of the big quality of life features that they added for Dragon Quest 3, and obviously you can turn this on. It immediately asks you, do you want this on or not? It can point you everywhere. Like everywhere.
Yes, I turned off the golden circles. I also turned off the objective list on my menu screen. I was like, no, thank you.
Yeah, you wanted the old school experience of, I'm the hero, go to the town, let's talk to everyone. Let's see if they can give us directions or semblance of directions, and we can go and we can go there. It's like they really like try having it both ways of like, hey, if you remember how this was back in the day, like you can play it as pure as that. Obviously it's gonna look much prettier. The soundtrack's more orchestral because it uses the London Symphonic Orchestra for the adventure theme that plays a lot when you're outside, when you're outside, like in world exploration. But for people that are more like newer school, that are more like, it's like, I'm not used to having to go and put in the work and talk around. Maybe they're gonna tell you where you go, because it can be something's pretty vague. Like, you have that option, so you can like at least be lying as much as you can if you want that option. It's not like forced on you. And I appreciate that, because obviously modern game design definitely is more, let's eliminate the friction in specific areas so that more people can enjoy the game. This game handles that both. And
No, absolutely.
yeah,
It's one of the weirder parts of Slitterhead is how often it will not tell you where you're going. It'll just give you a vague kind of stop the mob boss. Yeah. It's like, great, but I'm in an industrial building. What do you want me to do? And I'll figure it out. So I like that. And I certainly like it in Dragon Quest. But it is nice to know that if I can't find the sun amulet or what have you, I can turn on the objectives and get the golden rings and whatnot. Because the Nintendo Power tip line does not exist anymore. Yeah,
now it's called Daddy and Wiki Guide.
True.
Or the million SEO farming like guides that you can put it in Google and automatically always like gives you that. It was interesting playing this game, not having that available. Like, okay, well, I'm gonna try to rely on like what the game gives me, because there is like probably you remember there's a point in the game that becomes wide open with there's many different objectives. We're not gonna tell you. You just have to find specific things, and even the objectives are like very vague. It's like, no, just find this, but you can still follow the circle. You just have to go there, and then you just have to be like, okay, it's pointing me here. I guess I got to poke around and see, but I know it's here. Okay, maybe I cannot do anything here. Let's go to another yellow circle that's pointed on the map.
Well, I'm ready. I am ready to play Dragon Quest. I had to make a few tweaks. I needed to increase the battle speed.
Yes.
I recommend that.
Ultra fast. Do ultra fast.
And I recommend turning the run button to a toggle, so you're not holding it the entire game.
Oh, yes. Especially
and those two changes, I'm good to go. I have enjoyed my entire morning experience with Dragon Quest. So it's been an exciting year for JRPGs, which I know you want to talk about.
Oh yes. And real quick, like the automatic of like what's happening in the combat system, that's new, right? Before it used to be like you had to like command every member, right? Because I think Dragon Quest 11 did that, where you can have like a tactic, like automatic tactic that you can tell like your entire team to, just be aggressive, or be mindful, or you be the support and you don't use magic, or do I'm gonna set up the commands, because at least that's what the review guy told me. That's what they added.
I believe you. Honestly, Dragon Quests are so intentionally similar across their entire kind of history that I will admit that my memory gets jumbled as to when things were added and not.
Because they're that similar.
Yes, because like if that was a Dragon Quest 11 edition or a Dragon Quest 8 edition or what have you, then it's just in my head as part of Dragon Quest. And so, yes, one of the very first things I did was turn off everybody's automatic AI and make them fight under my command. And then kind of slowly, after I learned what they were doing, kind of go back and change them to having that AI, because there is a certain role-playing fun of I'm the leader, I'm going to set you guys in motion, but you're going to take care of things. I'm going to give you a nice dagger and you go get those monsters. That isn't as realized when you're giving every order individually. So I do like that as an option.
Yeah, and I like that you can make it malleable. Like you can malleate it as individually or like as a group if you want. Like many times, like while I was playing, I kept the follow orders to my hero, but then left automatic commands to like my priest, who was my healer. But no, you focus on you have my back.
I'd never give up my hero.
Yes.
My hero, I'm doing the things for my hero. Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, especially because I got my hero so powerful later in the game that I got the electricity magic that when I did the Show No Mercy, he kept using that electricity magic because it's the most powerful thing. And I was like, wait, this is cool that I'm facing these 6 enemies and it's eliminating them so quickly, but you're wasting 30 MP, hero. And I'm gonna say that I'd rather give you the commands because you're abusing this a little too much. And for boss fights, I found like the follow order for everyone, that was the most effective strategy, because automatic worked well with that endless random encounters that sometimes happen, especially in dungeons. But I found it much easier to not do automatic in like a boss fight, because that's where I didn't feel like they were doing the best. They were picking their best attacks to do the boss. And I learned this is one of those games where boss fights could sometimes attack you twice or thrice in a row before you even get your other turns. I was like, this is kind of weird. Why are this cheating? Why are they allowed to attack twice? And I haven't got.
I had no concepts of fairness when I was a kid. I don't know what to tell you.
I know. So it was like getting to realize that I was like, okay. So, and I learned that very important stat to keep in mind here: agility. Like agility is like what determines who goes first whenever you have your commands, because it was like you have your order, but I always had like my priest attacking first, and I was like, why are you going first? Like, you're the last one in my command, and I want the other ones to do first, and then you go. And then I learned, I was like, how do you figure out how to do the order like of the commands? And it's like, whoever has higher agility, that's gonna be your order. I was like, bingo. Went through the gear, changed it. I was like, okay, my hero's gonna have all the agility because I want his attacks first. Then I want my martial artist to kind of like come in with his like dive kick afterwards, and then have my magician do the boom magic. And then the healer's gonna just do a final swoosh, like that wind tornado thing that just kind of clean up. I was like, that's what I was missing, and I didn't figure that out until like 20 hours later, because it can be pretty vague. I feel like.
I'm just running merchants and mimes right now. So
oh really? Yeah, there's so many classes. I was like, I heard about the Monster Wrangler. It's also a pretty good healer. I was like, maybe in my other run, I'm gonna test that, because there's so much. And as you mentioned, is like you figure out the concept of grinding in this game. Like, I felt at least for the first 6 to 8 hours, like the grind, it's not gonna be there. I feel it's like pretty smooth. You'll be able to go normally until you reach a pyramid dungeon, which was the end of where my preview was. That was when I felt, oh, okay, this is now. I felt this went from 0 to 100. Like these rank
in the past, the Dragon Quest series has usually given you a good slap in the face when you've gone over one bridge too many or gone in the wrong dungeon.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was actually going to mention this to you because even starting the game, where I usually wander around the outside of the town for a little bit and make sure I can get all the equipment in the first town, they have seemingly, and my memory could just be mistaken, considerably reduced kind of the very, very early grind of I can't even walk outside without being scared for my life, and kind of made that whole first continent area a little bit more
inviting,
not tutorial-ish, but not destined to kill you in moments. That I remember from my prior Dragon Quest experiences. So I do think that they have smoothed out some of the notorious curvature of the difficulty in Dragon Quest. I'm not sure I personally love that, but I could always turn it up to whatever draconian.
Yeah, draconian. And the Draki is the easier difficulty, which if you put it in that difficulty, the enemies are still going to do the same attack value, so you can still be one shot, but it enables God mode. So basically it's like, oh yeah, it's normal, super hard, like you're gonna get slapped, or just put it in baby mode. Basically, it's where you'll never die, you will never have to do the resurrection mechanic. It's like in your fights you're gonna be just with 1 HP no matter how much attacks you have. This is just for if you want to see the story. And I'm like, I get that, because obviously there's gonna be a lot of people that are not used to sometimes the ruthlessness of old school JRPGs, but kind of like in typical Square Enix related titles, like how they do balancing between like certain difficulties. Why do they always get it? Like they always get it wrong. It feels like there's always
they probably need 5 settings. Like 3 is probably too broad.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. Square Enix has consistently had an issue with. No, I don't want it to feel like Dark Souls, but I also don't want to just wander through, not concerning myself with the gameplay elements at all. Right this second, I like what they've done. I personally would probably turn up the grind a little bit, but I can certainly understand the test groups or their designers being like, no, Hoeg doesn't exist out there. That's fair. Yeah, I don't appear to on this particular question, certainly.
Yes. And I'll definitely like this. We love chatting it up, or they're in the x.com. I'm gonna wait for you to hit the pyramid and then let me know how you feel, because that was the moment where I was like, okay, now I'm feeling like the gloves are off here. It's like, now I have to grind for this. And that's where me not understanding, because I was a more of a relative newcomer for the series, and the game doesn't really explain to me until a friend did, that one of the easiest ways to ease up the grind is if you get lucky and find the metal slimes, that when you kill those metal slimes, it gives you like 12k XP that can like really boost you up. And I was like, oh, when I saw one of those, I tried to get out of the fight, because it was like a metal slime versus like 5 zombies, and I'm like, no, it's like, this is not gonna happen. I'm just trying to flee here. It's like I'm getting destroyed here. So it's interesting how they secretly have like eased up on, and apparently this is from even back then, that those metal slimes was like how you could get like quicker leveling, because I felt like some of the XP leveling, once you hit like level 13 to 15, that's when I was like, oh, the brakes have pumped here, because I'm like, if your next level requirement is 3000 XP, the one that you're getting is like 30. I'm like, oh no, how many do I have to fight just to the next one? So you start thinking about that, like, oh, this is old school stuff.
But
But
even telling you the experience you need is new. Like it
oh,
used to
it
be
was
in Dragon
made
Quest, you
before.
have to go ask. You have to go ask how many experience points I need to get the next level.
That's right, the priest. Like you can ask the priest if you go to like a priesthood church, and you can ask to be like, hey, it's like a benediction or something. It was like, oh yeah, you need this, but they added that now in the menu. So
I was gonna say, yeah, but it's in my menu now, bub. So I don't need to talk to you on this.
Yeah,
yeah. So they changed that. That was one of the kind of what we would consider polished parts of Dragon Quest in the modern era. But that was like one of the ideas of the old Dragon Warrior, Dragon Quest series was you'd have to go to the church to do all these various things.
Yeah, and there's just so much charm going like in this game. Everywhere you go, like the towns, especially this one, that are like modeled after like Rome, Portugal, Japan, like that kind of have this analogs to real world. And on top of that, because it has the Akira Toriyama kind of like cartoon sheen, which, because I'm a big Dragon Ball fan, like it's even more heartwarming, especially since we lost him this year, and seeing how much personality that has, even when you see like the pixel art animations of the fights. I feel like this was some of the most expressive like pixel art animation that I've seen in high detail, especially when you're like in battle. Then I'm like, when I compare to like the Final Fantasy pixel remasters, that the art is like static image that didn't just kind of like moves when you're like in the fight, except with when the sprites of your characters do something like they lift their hand when they're doing like magic or something. It's like this is way more expressive. Like they've gone above and beyond with like the animation of this. And I don't know, like how do you like the pixel the pixel art mixed with the 3D environments of this one? Because Octopath, it was all pixel, like it had the entire pixel chain, and in here they're mixing. I felt it worked well because of
I think it does work well. I mean, my favorite is probably still Octopath Traveler as to how they implemented their graphics, but I think this works well, and the overworld, the various aspects of the three-dimensionality that I have seen so far don't stand out so much as what I consider to be the kind of cheaper anime approach. Like one of the games that I was really looking forward to this year, Aiden Chronicles, has this pretty significant split between the way their pixel people run around and then like this just very PlayStation 1-esque high definition 3D areas that looks kind of junky to me. And this doesn't have that effect, as best I can tell so far.
Yeah,
so I'm happy about that.
Yeah, it's more congruent, and I feel like the coloring and like the colorful nature of it makes it even more congruent, especially because they took into account like no matter where you are in the environment when a battle starts, even the fighting scene like changes. Like it's like it adapts to your environment, so it feels like more like you're still part of that environment, whether it's in a castle or you're in between a desert or like in more grassland area. And so it's like it's little details like that. I'm like,
it's funny. It's one of the first things I checked. Like I'm on the overworld. I'm like, I want to go do a fight in a forest and see if they change my background. Oh, good.
Yes. So yeah, there's a lot. They nailed a lot of like that quality of life stuff. In my I gave it an 8 over at Season Gaming. Kind of like my critiques were more in the obviously the grind early on was like needed to adapt for that. Obviously I was also rushing to get a review because I had a dead console that sent me that 5 days, and I really needed to hit that embargo. And getting into that, I'd be like, oh yeah, it's like the grind requirements are like a little too much. I'm gonna say this, the menu system in the equipment menu, though you mentioned some of the things that they added, I feel that the equipment menu is very old school and obtuse, where it's like when you pick an item, you don't even know if it's gonna be beneficial to like either of your party members unless you go sometimes individually to like their stat screen and see if
there's some clunk there. There definitely is.
Yeah, so it's like a lot of time of being kind of like that. I enjoyed the simplicity of the story, kind of like because it just kicks you up so much. I also feel it's a simplicity that remains there throughout, that to me it just stood out more considering that I played something like Metaphor recently, also kind of like this, like, oh yeah, it's like in similar length. I'm like, yeah, this definitely has that storybook, very simplicity. Saturday morning cartoon is like the story never changes from you're the hero following on the footsteps, trying to vanquish our archfiend Boramos, and it's go to a town, solve the promise of the town, hope that the town also gives you a hint of where's the next town for you to go, and all that, and it goes like that. And I didn't mind it, especially with one of my favorite games this year was basically that too. We'll talk about that in what's coming next. But then it's something just to kind of really notice, like, yeah, this was an RPG that was a format. This was one of the formative JRPGs from back in the early aughts. It's like, I see this as a museum piece of like for anyone curious to see where the genre started in specific ways and how then it evolved like a few years later. I feel it works like that. You just have to be knowledgeable. It's like, don't expect more depth there, considering that these were the building blocks. This was kind of like this set the foundations basically, or even 1 and 2, which I've not played also, but I'm definitely gonna play 1 and 2 when they come out.
I was gonna say the HD-2Ds come out next year, right? That's gonna be awesome.
Yeah, and they directly tee them up in this one. You'll see how they do it. That's all I'll say. So.
No, I love this. I was thinking while I was playing it that I really like that Final Fantasy has the pixel remasters and Dragon Quest is getting these HD-2Ds because they are different enough approach to this kind of remake of these really important games to me that I'm glad they're going to be able to coexist. I would love it if there was some kind of like combined app at some point so that you could actually see them bounce between each other because they were fighting, right? The various ideas that were happening. Dragon Quest was the huge success in Japan. Final Fantasy a little bit less so, but you can see them kind of arguing about the job system and whether characters should have specific backgrounds, and this bounces between the two games throughout. And I love that. I love to see that in the history of games. Obviously, this is one of my favorite genres, and so I'm thrilled that this exists. But I don't envy the reviewer of Dragon Quest 3 because it's not metaphor. It's not Veilguard. It's exactly what you want if you already like Dragon Quest.
Yes.
But I don't know exactly what to say about that. It's a 10 if you like Dragon Quest. It's also not kind of modern in a lot of the sensibilities that it has, which I think a lot of people are going to view as a negative. I personally don't, but I certainly understand some of the lower scores that I've seen on this particular project because there are things like the first-person combat that we expect from Dragon Quest that isn't terribly visually interesting for the most part. And other things that happen with it that aren't some really, really, really high-scoring, really well-designed games that have come out this year already.
Oh yes, and I feel like to me like the quality of life that this one didn't have was just more like I played the pixel remasters, which in that one like you can is your entire option. You don't even have to touch it, but do you want more XP or do you want more currency to be earned after battles, or like do you want to turn off random enemy encounters? You can do that there, and that one's not here. The quality of life for this one was lower the difficulty, and the pixel remasters Final Fantasy didn't have difficulty option. It was just modify this but still kind of do the grind, but it sped it up, and it was just more like, as I feel this is gonna play better for anyone that doesn't play the pixel remasters, like specifically in those areas. If they're more like, if they don't like random encounters, I was like, I really enjoyed how I was able to like play the Final Fantasy VI remaster last year, and like having that turned off and being able to explore like Kafka's castle and like the emperor's the factory at the Empire, and be able to like do it all in my leisure and be like, okay, I want to fight a little bit, let's turn that off, and immediately the battles would start. At least it gives you that. And I feel a lot of remasters from like that era currently, I feel have all accounted to be able to turn off random encounters. This is one of the first times that they don't. So it's something to warn people that there will be times where 3 steps, here's another 6 enemies, another 4 steps, here's another 6 enemies, and they'll sometimes like start attacking you. They might one-shot you, so just be careful. So it's just kind of like in comparison, but it makes it feel more hardcore compared to like the pixel remaster. And I feel like glad that they're both as kind of like contrast of each other. It's like this is more hardcore in specific ways, and this is very malleable in different ways. And it's cool seeing them like be next to each other, considering back in the day they were like direct competitors, and Square and Enix were not one and the same back then. So yeah,
it's funny. I appreciate that perspective because I don't think I've hit any of those buttons on the pixel remasters ever. Like, I don't think I've hit the 2x speed. I don't think I've hit the experience or currency stuff on those games because that's just not the way that I interact with them. So I think that is useful perspective in the fact that Dragon Quest doesn't allow you to do that at all.
Yeah, and it's just like a direct comparison thing. I feel like being able to like analyze it as itself, like they did their own quality of life in specific areas. They accounted for a lot. I feel this is very, for anyone curious, this is a very solid way to experience one of gaming's oldest JRPGs. Like, and just be aware with some of that, like some of that old school clunk will read its ugly head maybe later in the game. But this one I'm eager to hear you see. I want to see how long it takes to beat this one, because I know you like Dragon Quest. So
I'll probably take my time with it, honestly. This is one of those where I really do wander the earth and grind XP until I feel like moving on.
Yeah.
So it'll probably be a little while, but I really do like that Square Enix has had so much success with their remasters, because this year also features one of my favorite of theirs, which is Romancing Saga 2, which I do not hear enough people talking about, which takes a entirely different approach to both the Pixel Remaster and the HD-2D of Dragon Quest III. Romancing Saga as a series, the Saga series entirely, is not one that I connected with when it originally came out. It wasn't one that I think was regularly released in the West, and it kind of slipped through the cracks for me, who was focused on Final Fantasy and Dragon Warrior at the time. But this particular game, Romancing Saga, is very much a turn-based RPG with kind of simplified mechanics, like a Dragon Quest, but in a world that you can kind of maneuver in various directions across generations to almost open world Western RPG design around a JRPG combat system. And I think it's probably one of my favorite of their efforts here, because it's fully 3D. It's got the full graphical stylings of something like
full turn-based.
And it's fully turn-based. It's gorgeous. And it is probably one of my favorites of the year, honestly.
I had the demo of that one, and that kind of got slipped. That one slipped through the cracks of me reviewing the Alan Wake DLC, Call of Duty, and this one kind of like back to back. I still have the demo there ready, because I'm like, I just need a little break from turn-based right now after blowing through Dragon Quest III HD. But I'm really interested in that as someone that has gotten more. I think I mentioned it to you, Rick, last time you were in the show, that I became a reconvert to turn-based when I used to like not be about that, and it took the Final Fantasy Pixel Remasters to make me refine that love that I used to have back in the Pokemon days. So I'm having it there just for the mood to kind of like hit, like just strike right now, especially since Dragon Quest I think is my final review for the year, so I get to finally be a normie at least until January. So I did 12 reviews again. Like I did 12 reviews last year, I did 12 reviews again this year.
That's a lot.
So it made some, for people say this is low, is like reviewing can be like can be tough, especially the games that I did, that some of them were like super long too. But I'm excited to play on that one. And it's funny I mentioned Romancing Saga, because that kind of fits into like what has been this year overall, and how I like to call this topic kind of like our scorecard for JRPGs in 2024. So I love how later you mentioned something about like so many people mention how like 2024 may be like a dry year and all of that. And I feel like I love doing the Obi-Wan Kenobi Return of the Jedi thing. Like what I said is true from a certain point of view. I feel 2024 for Western developed games has been pretty poor. Like either delays or just DLCs or just not showing up at all. But everything Japan related, especially when it comes to JRPGs and that's the thing, like when we think of JRPGs, it's not just a turn-based thing. It's like there's many different versions of JRPG nowadays, I feel like. And I feel we got all of that like served like back to back this year. Just like, let me list you some, like when out of the top of my head is like Grand Blue Fantasy Relink started, that's action RPG. Persona 3 Reload, that's turn-based RPG. Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, action turn-based hybrid, whatever they like calling that combat system. Unicorn Overlord, strategy RPG, I would call it. Dragon's Dogma 2, action RPG, like more like just traditional action. Ayuden Chronicle, old school style like turn-based RPG. Visions of Mana, action RPG too, like Metaphor Fantasy, full turn-based RPG, like in the Atlas style, like obviously Dragon Quest 3 HD-2D, a traditional turn-based RPG. The East 10 was in October. I think you were playing that one, if I remember.
I was. I love East.
Yeah,
and that very much comes from the same part of my brain that loves Dragon Quest. East book 1 and 2 was very much walk out of the town and immediately get swarmed by monsters that will devastate you, and then slowly get enough grind experience, slowly get enough armor to go and win those fights and get to the bosses with their rock guitar that only East has.
Yes,
and go fight them to the death. And so I like East 10 a lot. I think my favorite East is still going to wind up being 8. But I really do like the 8, 9, 10 sequence a lot. I think they found something with East. But yeah, it's been an incredible year. And you didn't even mention what might wind up being my favorite of the year.
Infinite Wealth.
Like a Dragon, Infinite Wealth.
Yeah,
which came out so early this year. that I think people forgot it exists.
It was the first one because it was like Infinite Wealth came out on the 26th, and then Grand Blue Fantasy, which was the one that I started on because I did that review, was on the 29th if you pre-ordered. So it's like the curse of releasing in January, be like, especially when you have such a robust year, is that the January games can sometimes get forgotten. And obviously that was like their second attempt at trying to build turn-based Yakuza. And I know for you, that's been the one you've been, at least in recent times, the one that keeps like championing that one, because I do feel that it got forgotten. At least when I hear the when people talk about like the best games of the year and all of that, like, why is that one not mentioned? It's like highly reviewed too. And
I do champion a lot because I feel like Infinite Wealth and Rebirth have a very kind of similar space in the role-playing game and gaming universe, really in general, which is this kind of enormous world, intricate combat system with systems that feed into other systems, whether it's a card game or an Animal Crossing game, in interesting ways. And Rebirth just kind of won that fight straight up in terms of the minds of the populace. And I think Infinite Wealth has lost some of its popularity because of that. But I think Infinite Wealth, for me at least, was the stronger effort, was the stronger game. I think in general, the Yakuza series has been telling more compelling stories more often than the Final Fantasy. Some of that is because Final Fantasy only releases games every so often. And RGG does not have that problem.
We're getting another one.
But like Rebirth, I know I've talked to you about it. I know I've mentioned it on the Bitcast. Rebirth is very popular to a lot of people. It's obviously a very, very well-resourced, enormous kind of game with huge world areas, really big towns with people to talk to everywhere that are all very distinct and different. That really comes from the 1997 original. But my big issue with Rebirth, and I know you know this already, is that because it is this middle 10-hour section of an existing game, it constantly teases forward plot progression, and it's not in this game. Hopefully it's in 3. Hopefully it's in 3. I know a lot of the plot points that I would like to see, and so those are going to happen in the finale, one assumes. But this particular game has you kind of constantly wandering and not having plot progress. And that turned out to really bother me after a point in time, certainly in the middle section of that game. But even getting towards the ending, the thing I knew was coming, the plot points that I knew were going to happen, I wasn't thrilled with how they were portrayed or the decisions that the designers had made in this reboot of that story. And so the final kind of position I had with Rebirth was, I'm not at all convinced that I want to see your finale of this version of the story. And that's not where you want to leave me coming out of your project, but I am apparently one of the few that feels that way. So good for everybody else. I want people to have fun with these things.
It's what I find interesting, especially because I know how big of a Final Fantasy fan you are, and how Rebirth, out of all the Final Fantasies in like the last 20 years, has been like the most championed, the most like, this is definitely gonna get the game of the year nod. It's like a 92 on Metacritic, 93 Open Critic, and it's the one that you find yourself kind of like the Squidward. Have you seen the Squidward meme of SpongeBob being like in the window with like the shades open where everyone's having fun? And I feel that's you with Rebirth right now.
Well, I never want to take away from other people's fun, but it does feel that way a little bit because I'm sitting here going, 16 was a much better
story
experience for me. It was a much better story. That's what I'm looking for from my RPGs. One of the reasons I have issues with Veilguard is that it doesn't have that kind of compelling progression, but I can see that it has enjoyable combat, which maybe is enough for folks on Rebirth. Maybe I'm expecting more from Final Fantasy VII as a reboot project because I know that story so well. And they just kind of slow played it. And in my opinion, what I was looking forward to from this trilogy exercise was, okay, you guys got to figure out how to take this chunk of game and make it a compelling story on its own. Like I thought that was whiteboard item number 1. How are we going to make this into a beginning, middle, and end when it's obviously not in the original project? And they just said, we're not. We're going to skip that. That's not one of our goals. We're just going to go and we're going to have that 10-hour section be 100 hours and have fun. And that's worked for a lot of people. So I can't even tell them that they're wrong, but it didn't work for me.
And it's funny because I always take credit because I was the first one to point it to you, like back in the when it was still like in the early times. I was like, doesn't this feel like Mass Effect 2? Like what they ended up doing? That it was like,
I do have a text from you saying this is Mass Effect 2 for you.
Yeah, and I was like, because it's like they did not flesh out much like point A to point B, like what the story was from this point, which was like the travel log and all of that. But it was like they did the let's flesh out like what we did in Remake, but let's do it like in the side quests, in the worlds, kind of like in the appendixes, you would say, kind of like in the more mini stories and all of that. That in the moment you're like, because the world is so beautiful, it's so creative, these characters, because of the nostalgia I have associated with these characters, getting to spend more time like hanging out with this party that is like so compelling and all that, and maybe getting some like kernels of story from within that party that I feel a lot of people like took that as like, no, this is why the story is so great, because look how great it is to hang out with the party. But then it's like when you finish the game and then you analyze, be like, oh, what happened? For 9 chapters, where we kept walking, we got to the Gongaga reactor. Tifa fell into the live stream. She saw that there's like a battle between whispers happening at the core of the live stream, and then over things at Cosmo Canyon, you're told about like the planet's dying, and you have to find what ends up like giving you the plot that you eventually get to that point in the original game. And that's when you realize it's like, yeah, it's like, it is when you ask the question, tell me what Rebirth's about it, that's when you start realizing, crap, there's like not much really happened here. And but why were people so enchanted by the fact that nothing was happening when all of that kind of like stories has been happening? It's like, it's something that I mentioned that I really wanted to kind of talk to you about, where storytelling in gaming is like this year, particular that, and you mentioned Infinite Wealth, because I think it was one of the tweets that I told you that I would love to be able to discuss a little bit of this. It was from Jacob Geller when the nominees for the Golden Joystick Awards showed up, and both Infinite Wealth and Rebirth were kind of like there, and he pointed as like, oh man, this is gonna be a really tough year to hear the best story, kind of like the best story award, and seeing that both Infinite Wealth and Rebirth are kind of like leading that pack, when it's like these games have a lot of like great character moments in a story that doesn't work as a story. And that really like put me like into my mind is like, do people not have concept of storytelling, where you say, or are people just so enamored with character driven stuff? Because I especially from Yurik, I've been hearing it a lot about kind of like it feels like, don't you feel like plot, like at least just general plot, and not just in games, but I also see it in TV and even some movies, like has plot taken a backseat to just character building? This when
I think both are story. I certainly think there's value in learning more about characters and in nuance and in what I would consider intricate storytelling. But yes, I do think that if you make your game polished enough, if you make your movie shiny enough, then people can not expect, not demand as much plot in order to enjoy the experience, right? I think on movie side of things like Transformers, which I don't hate, the original certainly, and it's got bombastic music, it's got giant robots fighting, it isn't much of a plot, it isn't much of a story at the end of the day, but there are things to like about that experience. I think Final Fantasy VII Rebirth has that kind of top-of-class graphics, has that kind of top-of-class combat system. I really think it's one of the best, if not the best, in role-playing games. And that's enough for a lot of folks to enjoy themselves. And certainly people that have already played Final Fantasy VII or have nostalgic feelings towards Final Fantasy VII can fill in certain aspects of the story and say, well, I know it's going to go here, here, and here, vis-a-vis Cloud, vis-a-vis Sephiroth, whatever it might be.
Vis-a-vis Meteor and the weapons.
All these various things that we can just hint at with little CGI cutscenes. But to me, as a project itself, it's not compelling because I'm not giving you credit for the prior story that you told however many years ago at this point. So
it's sleight of hand, like relying on something just because, oh yeah, it's like because people will know. It's like sliding, having that sleight of hand that the nostalgia will carry, that people will be like, oh yeah, we stopped here, but we know that's coming. So it's kind of like a pre-prepared like cheat code almost, it feels like, of them not getting, I think there.
Definitely the Final Fantasy VII project kind of lives on the notion that you already like this thing, you know it's going to go in this direction. And really what Rebirth reminded me of was how unbelievably so much stuff happens in Final Fantasy VII. Like, I know it was a couple of discs in the PlayStation era, but like all of the stuff that happens in Final Fantasy VII is amazing, but not maybe so much the second half of disc 1, which is what Rebirth is. So I like that game. I've gone back to try it a number of times. It keeps kind of bouncing me out because I'm not so interested in the open world stuff. I'm not so interested in talking to Chadley.
Yeah.
And realistically, with an open world game, the way I play them is I go and do the open world things. I think people have heard me say I like Ubisoft games more than some here too.
Yeah.
I go do the open world things. I enjoy those bits of content. And then when I feel like I need more plot, when I want more story, I go and I hit the main quest line. And where Rebirth really didn't work for me is whenever I would do that,
there was nothing happening there.
Would not be compelling. And so,
especially in that middle section,
Infinite Wealth is kind of the opposite, which is that I would go and I would do Animal Crossing for a while, or I would go collect Pokemon people, and I would do these things in Infinite Wealth, and then I would say, okay, I want to move on. And all right, now we're going to talk about a cult leader and various manipulations of the island of Hawaii. And that always felt like something was happening. I was moving forward, and then I could go back to my Animal Crossing island and whatnot. And so that, to me, Infinite Wealth and Rebirth have a shared kind of DNA, and Infinite Wealth does it better.
Yeah, and Infinite Wealth is like a more modern, newer game, while the other one is trying to remake a story written in 1997 that they didn't want to touch as much. Right. Like it's it has
they didn't
want
to change it too much. Yeah, and that's some things of the issues with the ending of that game, but honestly, I knew that was going to go down something like the way that it did. I didn't like the way that they presented it, but there's really only so much you can do to a story like Final Fantasy VII and still have it be Final Fantasy VII when you're done.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just so curious to see, like, because I remember, if you remember, I was like, when I finished it, I was like, I'm somewhere in the middle with where that end, where that ended. It's like, I like the epicness and like kind of like the emotionally steering fan service that happens in that 10-hour boss fight at the end. Obviously it's not 10 hours, but it's how long it's happening. But it's like I saw that they sacrificed the sudden loss of what you're supposed to happen for coping mechanism that I feel is putting too much that it sacrifices kind of like what made a Final Fantasy VII special back then, which was like we lost someone we loved like out of sun, like suddenly, and now we have to kind of live with that emptiness. And then when I kind of saw what they were doing, I was like, so they're kind of like having a coping mechanism to maybe have like the emotional breakdown for the character happen late in the future game, but it's like it's putting extra weight than that having to be emotionally moving for the audience to feel that. Where back in the day, even when I played Final Fantasy VII original for the first time last year, it was like me even knowing what was coming, how that scene happened, was like, wow, this was profoundly sad. I didn't expect that this was gonna still hit like it did, and how simple it was.
That was a big deal back then.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I was playing through Rebirth with my daughter, and part of my thoughts on that game are undoubtedly echoes of her experience with it at the same time. But whereas she was completely compelled by Remake the first time we played it, she was losing interest in certain places in the middle of Rebirth. But more importantly, we got to the end. We talked about what happened. We do our postmortems in Hoeg House about these things. And then I showed her a YouTube clip of the original version of those events at the end of Rebirth. And her immediate reaction was, whoa, that was way better. That is much more affecting than what I just watched. And it undoubtedly is. Like, part of what happens at the end of Rebirth is, if I'm being mean, it's kind of the nihilistic artist wanting to feel important about what they're putting forth. And when we look at the original, it really was designed to have a specific effect. And this one is designed to say, well, what could the future hold? Who knows? Buy the next one, everybody. And I think I felt that a little bit more than some do. I honestly, and I know I've said this to you in text, don't think it's that controversial. I don't think it's that weird what they're showing at the end of Rebirth. So I think even some of the kind of theorizing that you see online is perhaps
it's over theorized. It's over theorized, I would say.
Yeah, I think so. And so I don't think that they accomplished really either mission that you would hope for there, which is getting the emotional beats down right. I think they missed that. I was really upset about that, honestly, when it happened. Or the kind of drive to the next instance in the trilogy, theorize about it, have all of your Reddit posts, whatever it might be. I don't think they really pulled that off either. So overall, I view Rebirth as one of my more disappointing games of the year because I was so excited about it, right? I've said this in other venues, but disappointment requires you to have expectations. And I was really excited about this one. Remake was, I think, my second favorite game of the year. The year came out.
Yes, Ghost of Tsushima was your number one that year.
Yeah, so I really loved that game. I wound up playing it a couple times. I wound up playing through intermission a couple of times. I really liked that whole project. And then Rebirth just didn't connect with me. And it's still on my PlayStation. Like, I still downloaded because I have it there as popping into it when I feel like it, but I almost never feel like it. And that makes me sad.
Yeah.
Right? I wanted to love that one, but I can't be too sad because Infinite Wealth is great. I love Romancing Saga 2. We talked about that. Metaphor. My God, Metaphor.
Yeah, that's the one that when we come like a game that's nailing character and story and like almost in 10, I feel Metaphor would be like the example of like of storytelling in JRPG for this year. I was especially how timely the story was for the United, especially recently in the recent happenings of the United States. So,
well, and you can see that people like Ains at Bitcast think it's too talky, right? At a certain level,
it can be.
In order to get really good characterization and really good storytelling, you have to put some time into either direct exposition or just time in learning about characters in your story. And I do think Metaphor is maybe a touch too talky, but only in the same way that the Persona games always are. Like, they just like to have all right, so we've got this major mission, let's have dinner and talk about it in 3 different ways. And Metaphor certainly does that, but my goodness, the fact that Metaphor exists is just fantastic.
And wild that it came out when it did. It made like a lot of like the big things happening with the succession of the kingdom and things like that, just to try to keep it vague. Feels so prescient, like especially if you were in the United States and were like in tune with the presidential election. Everyone was like, this is an interesting game to be playing, and some of the things mentioned here, how eerily timely it feels like doing that, despite the fact that it's not we don't have to kind of get into it, because I think you want to do like that conversation eventually, like kind of like the difference between politics versus politics, and yes, that can be its own topic by itself, which I 100% like. It's a worthy conversation to have.
In a world where I have infinite energy, politics versus politics is one of the topics I would like to have as a short form video essay kind of thing on the channel.
Yeah.
And I do think that there's a worthy conversation to be had around essentially modern day politic infusions into fantasy stories, whether they're video games or movies, and fantasy stories that can have politic overtones or even thoughts about the human experience or how we organize our society, and how those are different, and that people that maybe don't care about communicating specifically to their audiences or just in general combine those in ways that are unfortunate for understanding what it is that some people reject in their media.
Oh yes. And I feel like I love, especially what I love about the politics of Metaphor and like what I played is just how much it feels so congruent with like the world that they have established, instead of just being like this is our direct analog to preach you about BLM, let's say, or things like that. That is like what happens, like, so I've seen the clip of like what happens with Dragon Age, the Veilguard, the character that's gender fluid and going kind of like on a very what's the equivalent that I would say? It feels like an HR like explanation of what it means to be like transgender and all that in a way that I'm like, there's a fantasy where I feel like this could have been written in a way that didn't feel like I'm watching kind of like an infomercial of something, despite the fact there's like a fantasy world. And I feel a lot of
Tosh. I mean, I think one of the things that I think about Tosh and Veilguard in general is that it's a very bluntly written game. It's a very bluntly written story. It's very bluntly written characters. So I actually think that the Tosh plot line is probably okay in the kind of Star Trek allegorical sense of things, but it lacks the subtlety and finesse and artistry that you want from those stories, to not have them just neatly map on to the bulletin board in your employee lunchroom. And so I do think that it has that problem. I think some of the complaints about that are justified. I actually think Tosh is an okay character, and I think that plot line is actually okay, but the language used does have that effect. And I think Veilguard has that problem throughout. It's not just Tosh. It's just that she's the most obvious one.
Oh yeah, and it's in starker contrast with Metaphor, that even like with the capital, the capital I issues that it deals with, just feels so. You feel it as like, man, this feels deep. This feels very.
It's art. It's legitimate art.
Yeah,
and I think Metaphor gets closest when it's diving into the things that are written in the fantasy book. Like it's speaking very specifically about stuff, but it's not a clean analogy to the real world, because we're obviously not the world described in that fantasy book. And it's definitely not a clean analogy to the world of Metaphor, because Metaphor has
metaphors,
combinations of races that are in control of society and ones that are underclass and various things that don't line up at all with what we see in our world, because they're telling their own story. And yes, you can apply lessons that you learn from stories. In fact, I recommend that you do so in your life.
Is the point.
But it's not that kind of clear application, which honestly is the metaphor in Metaphor. It's a really smart kind of bit of storytelling. And I do reject the folks that kind of want to say, all right, well, it's clearly about discrimination. It's clearly about freedoms and liberties and various things. Yes. And also not the way you want it to be. It's telling a different story. Although I really do like that it has at least sparked this conversation. And one of my favorite kind of bits of separated media is, I don't know if you follow Gene Park on X, but he got given to him a bit of art that has the King's Stone over the White House with a Trump head and a Harris head.
Yeah.
Like, yep, that's a good piece of art right there. And I think that's fun. In what we can learn about media. And yes, the story about Metaphor is, what can media tell you about the world? So it's multiple metaphors.
It's so old school, because like old school Final, especially with Final Fantasy VI, I think at two, it struck me hard. Like that game deals with themes in a way that, especially for a game in the 90s, I was like, I'm surprised you're dealing with this and how deftly you're handling this. And especially if you recognize things like suicide, like that, or like young child, like a pregnancy, like in the World of Ruin, things like that. I was like, wow, it's like this would have been like really mind blowing in the 90s, but it was like handled with a touch that I feel so many games like either don't touch or don't handle. I feel like Final Fantasy 16 handled a lot of like serious stuff like shockingly well, and with like a earnestness that I feel like earnestness sometimes is like it's missed in games that try to like deal with themes. Yeah, because everyone loves to be very blatant and swing the sledgehammer to kind of drive a point sometimes, that I feel like sometimes you just need an earnestness and kind of like a subtlety to be able to like weave in these themes that you can then see the analog like out in the real world, and kind of like apply that allegory or metaphor into things. And I feel I'm more impressed with that kind of storytelling than ones that try to like really push it on you. And that's what the thing that impressed me with Metaphor. I feel like I am in between two minds of that, because what's funny is that you heard my criticism about Rebirth. Rebirth's my favorite game of the year still. Even with that, like even me knowing that, because of how much I enjoyed the individual stories, the gameplay, the world, the combat, and all of that. But Metaphor,
every time I turn on Rebirth, it's kind of an amazement. Right?
Yeah.
I keep saying that I don't want to pop in, and I don't really want to play it. But like every time I turn it on and I'm walking around and the wah music is going on, and
it puts a smile on your face.
It's an amazing thing. It's a bit of magic in a box, and I don't want to take away from anybody that thinks that's the best thing of the year, because it is a little bit of wonder. It's just not what I wanted out of the project. I wanted them to tell me a story with that wonder, and they elected not to do so, and that's their right.
Yeah, it's why I said like there's a reason I didn't give it a 10. It's kind of like it's my favorite, but it was like I wish I could have, in a way, because I also know like how in my heart of hearts, like how it makes me smile. Just literally, I've had many times this year where I have kind of, you probably heard, like in Bitcast, Ames has mentioned that I've gone through some interesting stuff this year, and I have needed a place to, like, I need escapism, and Rebirth feels like escape. Like how that world feels, it just feels like escapism. The incredible music that just goes so hard, like the design of like the 6 different biomes, that is like you see the real world analog, and it has the 1997 like uniqueness to it, like
it really does. My biggest hope for Rebirth is that Modern Square decides that they can be that off the wall and weird with modern 3-dimensional graphics and storytelling in Final Fantasy 17 or whatever comes next, right? Like, you don't have to just be understandable or industrial, or Final Fantasy 15 with cars and 50s diners, or Final Fantasy 16 with Game of Thrones and medieval castles. Like, you can have these Costa del Sols and
next
these
to the golden
Gaga
saucers.
reactors, and that will actually make it better. Even if they don't immediately feel like part of the same world, they will with all the pieces put together. And my hope is that that's what Final Fantasy used to be, and that it can be again, and that Rebirth proves that can still work.
Yeah,
hopefully with a story that you tell throughout it.
Yeah, and that's what I always said. Like, I remember when I reviewed it in my show, like with my podcast co-host, that we were talking, is like, if the characters weren't as lovable as they are, if the world wasn't as established, the things that this game doesn't do, it would have got dinged even harder. Like, especially with storytelling, I feel like that I will love the world building of a 16 to be mixed into like variety and the world design and quest design of a Rebirth, and that be 17. Yeah, it's funny playing 15 that I see so much connecting tissue with 15 and Rebirth. That Rebirth feels like a more like fleshed out version of that concept that they started testing there, where 15 has the advantage that it tells a complete tale, broken up in its anime.
I was gonna say,
and all
15
of that.
is a cobbled together Frankenstein monster, but yes, it does have a beginning and an end.
Exactly, it has that. Whereas Rebirth has that kind of like it split the baby. It split the torso of the baby. Here, it's funny. It's funny seeing it that way, but I feel like they're in a good shape. That is like, if let's say that Rebirth was kind of like a tech demo of like, could we do this like crazy kind of like big Final Fantasy, and see how that works. And you notice a lot of people who, funny, Mr. Nib 95, when he argued with you against the substance of Metaphor versus Rebirth, and the things he was listing is like, that's gameplay stuff. That's kind of like world stuff, not story.
It is, yes. So, that's Twitter for you.
Yeah, so,
yes. I understand that you can ride chocobos around and all that good stuff. I think it is a magical little place to go to. It just doesn't have a story.
Exactly. So, and that's what I find fun. I find funny, like, just to kind of close out with the whole storytelling thing, how much like I feel a lot of gamers can be like won over by character stuff without like much plot. And I've been seeing it with that, like with The Last of Us TV show from HBO was like that did a lot of like tangential character stuff that I was like, why does the pacing of like how the same story I was telling the game feels different here in the show? Is because of all those tangents. And obviously that third episode, that the Bill and Frank tangent that won like these awards and all of that, is like had nothing to do with the show, but everyone kind of loved just kind of like the tiny personal side. And I feel that's where a bunch of storytelling has been here, that I'm noticing that back in the day we used to have a better balance of like, you had your character driven stuff, but there's also the grand tale that's kind of like connecting the tissues of like the meat that's kind of like they're in the bone. So it's
well, and to give credit where it's due to the modern games, when we talk about things like Dragon Quest 3 or other older games, I'm not sure that the character beats were always there. Final Fantasy did bring that to the party a little bit more than Dragon Quest, and certainly Terra and Celeste are some of my favorites ever. But I do think that there have been improvements in aspects of storytelling, and I think character is probably one of those. That if you break down Final Fantasy VI, even, which is my favorite Final Fantasy, that there are kind of almost comic-esque concepts that guide the characters that maybe wouldn't survive the more nuanced approach of the modern era. But I preferred those kind of epic plots. I want more epics in the world, right? I think you've probably seen me on Twitter talking about the fact that, having played Veilguard, I don't really have a lot of excitement or desire to see BioWare's Mass Effect, but I am continuously interested in this random project from this new studio of old BioWare people,
Exodus,
called Exodus. And I bought the book, which is almost 1,000 pages long, and I didn't even know it existed until a couple of weeks ago.
1,000, holy.
And it is the wackiest stuff. I'm actually concerned that Exodus might be too out there for people. Like, we're talking 60s sci-fi kind of stuff. And that said, I'm so happy to be reading something that's a new world and seeing how these rules work and various aspects of it in an epic kind of context that I don't think we do enough of. And really, Final Fantasy is one of the last places that does. And so I want to continue down that path. but I'm a little concerned for Square and some of the choices they've made, and kind of shortening up on that epicness either in Final Fantasy or their other projects. So I'm hopeful for Exodus. Yes. I'm less hopeful for Mass Effect 5. I guess it's probably officially 5 at this point.
If they call it 4, that would be like that's a complete erasure of Andromeda. Because this would be the
Andromeda. I don't know. I don't know what it is called internally. I don't know what they're going to market it as. Whatever they market it as, they might change the name about a week before it comes out. You don't know at this point. Interestingly, I keep waiting for a scene in which the Veil Guard says, "We've got to guard the Veil," or "We're some kind of Veil Guard," or something like that. And I don't know that they do.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that. Well, there was an IGN op-ed that basically mentions they never do. Where does Veil Guard come from?
There's one mission when you're getting the last couple of people for your crew that's called completing the Veil Guard, which is obviously just a text string. But I don't think anybody has ever said the words Veil Guard, and I don't believe we're guarding the Veil in any reasonable respect. So it's kind of weird.
Yeah.
But I'm glad it's not called Dreadwolf, because one of my biggest issues with the game is that they really do not pay off the ending of Inquisition.
They take care of it in like 20 minutes because that's how long the tutorial is. It's like the tutorial is over, that anything that in regards to Dreadwolf is gone, right? Like,
well, you get what I'll call flashbacks.
Oh, okay.
To understandings of the Dreadwolf, and actually there's a lot of lore dumps there, but it ain't about the Dreadwolf, so I'm glad it's not called Dreadwolf.
Yeah, it's just that this Dragon Age Pride really has been fascinating to kind of see, because you also see the remnants in design of the game it was, and then the game it kind of eventually became. Like from like what I saw even when you were mentioning Gene, he's been posting a lot in Blue Sky now. Like he's posting that he's now in the tail end of that one, and he's loving it. So it's like he got to that part, and I think he was kind of like in your same boat as like early on. He was like, "This sucks. I don't like that." And then he was like, "There may be something here." Like, I saw the 5 stages of grief going with him, kind of like an acceptance of kind of like what it was, but now I'm seeing like a positivity for that one. So I'm really, really curious to see like where that ship lands, because that has been the one part that even the 2 most negative reviews that I saw in the pre-release, which were Mr. Matty Plays and Skill Ups, they all mentioned like a great ending. So it's like,
everybody says the ending is great. I'm a little worried that I'm over expecting now, but everybody says the ending is great. I am hopeful. Gene and I have tracked almost entirely on our journey through Dragon Age. The first 10 hours are a bit of a car crash. The middle section, you get to a point where you're like, oh, okay, this game's doing some stuff. This is pretty good. I'm not sure he had quite as much of what I'm having, which is like, okay, enough of that. We're doing too much of that same thing in Act 2. But yeah, I want to see the ending, because I do think it's a very polished piece of software. I think it's graphically great. I'm glad it exists, but I'm not sure how I'll feel about it at the end of the day.
Yeah, but you still want to play it, which says a lot. I think that's kind of like the biggest compliment, because I've heard you sometimes like, I still remember your Ragnarok journey from 2 years ago. So
that does happen to me. I had to force myself through the front end of Outlaws. I almost like threw a control through a wall.
Yeah, that's always that. I feel so, especially like for people to know, like because obviously I reviewed it like in the pre-release environment, I did kind of warn you, like, hey, it starts a little rough, but just rest assured it gets there. But like the rough part really was rough for you. That was like, oh, did I underestimate how rough?
I've never had a game go like that. I've never had an experience like that in my life of, I think I hate this, but I spent money on it, so we're gonna see it through. To this might be my favorite, in this case, Star Wars game ever. Like that's, I understand kind of, okay, there's a rough patch and now it's kind of better. I feel that way with Veilguard. Outlaws, the beginning needs to be redone. I know they're redoing it, so there you go.
It's the roughest beginning of like a major like big name game of like this year. Like when I really think about like the big name games that I played this year, I feel Outlaws is definitely the roughest one. And I was in a boys' school with Ains and Ilu from Season Gaming, because we're also playing Concord around that time, RIP. And I had just gotten out of one of those early sessions, and I just went off on that. I was like, dude, I think this game kind of sucks. I remember being like, I just spent all this time in this stealth that is just completely broken. I'm like sliding down like this environment I should be able to climb, and all of that is like there's so many baffling choices like for a game that's like so focused on stealth, and then suddenly the next day I was like, oh wow, I think I love this. Like it went like that. That's why I was like, let's see if it was just me, but it's so universal. Even David Jaffe had the exact same arc of hating that early part, and then boom, up to the races. Like they really need to rework that because there's a wonderful Star Wars game there that is hidden behind that stupid start. And Veilguard at least was better than that, at least from like what I hear.
Veilguard is smoother than Outlaws, but it's not like incredibly great bar to clear, but it is smoother than Outlaws. Yeah. It's still a bit of a car crash.
Yeah. So Rick, just to conclude our topics before I move us to like the game releases, and then we can like let you go so you can get ready for your live stream. Like as a scorecard, what do you like? What will you score this year for JRPGs? It's kind of like just in the entire swath, and give me your top three. Like you were to pick your top three JRPGs of this.
Well, this is an A for me easily. It's not an A+ for JRPGs. I usually am rationing my JRPGs for 6 months until the next one comes out. Right? There's really been no pause this year, especially if you don't mind playing like the remasters, because we didn't even talk about like Paper Mario, and Mario and Luigi, and all these various other things that are filling in the JRPG side of things. So it's an A for me easily. My favorites are Infinite Wealth, Metaphor. It's probably going to be Dragon Quest, but I haven't played it enough to give it that just yet. So I'll go with Romancing Saga 2.
Yeah. And then for me, it's Rebirth would be my number one. My number two would be Metaphor. And then my number three would actually be Visions of Mana. That was also part of this year because that game was also a cozy little thing. And also, if you probably know, I'm more the action guy. If you see, and also Metaphor has kind of like that action tint, kind of start you on the battles that I really love. How you can like start slashing and then like go into like the strategies that I feel flow so well compared to like a Persona.
I really like the Mana Project. As you know, it saved me from mental breakdown during Outlaws. So I really like Visions of Mana. It's a surprise to me that Romancing Saga would be on that list. But I do highly recommend it.
Yeah, that's next for me. Like I'm waiting for the Christmas season to kind of be like, okay, let's see if there's some last minute sales, but if not, I'm diving into these. So Rick, I'm gonna close this out by reading the release dates for the week of November 17th to November 23rd. So we got Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 coming to Xbox Series X and S and PC on November 19th. Genshin Impact finally comes to Xbox consoles on November 20th. Stalker 2 Heart of Chernobyl coming to Xbox Series X and S and PC also November 20th. Long time coming.
That'll be a big one.
Yeah. And also on Game Pass. On Your Tail, I don't know what that is. What On Your Tail is coming to Switch and PC on the 21st. It's
like an indie mystery game where you're like I think you're like a fox lady on an Italian beach solving a mystery.
Oh, sweet. That sounds like a Hoax Notes game.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah. Total War Empire coming to iOS and Android on November 24th. I feel Total War is perfect for a phone. And Spirit Mancer coming to PS5, Switch, and PC on November 22nd. So obviously, if you're on the Xbox ecosystem, Flight Sim and Stalker, you're gonna get them on Game Pass, and Genshin Impact is free to play. So that's a long time coming for Genshin Impact. That's 4 years for them, but if they finally got there, so Stalker.
Well, maybe the whole Hoyoverse can come over, and you can explore cosmic space trains and what I can only describe as a punk Persona kind of thing.
Yeah, which is
the Zone Zero.
Yeah, which is the JRPG in that entire Hoyoverse. Is it Tower of something or
Tower Fantasy is not theirs.
Okay.
Hoyoverse's like classic JRPG is Honkai Star Rail.
Okay, Honkai Star Rail. Yeah, I was confused because like they look so, the art style makes them look so similar. Like which one's which he wanted. So Honkai Star Rail is the JRPG for them, and obviously
I recently got Zenless Zone Zero, and I have been surprised both by how weird it is and how engaging I have found it so far. I don't play these gacha games too long usually because I find their storytelling kind of disparate and not compelling enough, and I'm not going to spend money on going and pulling the handle. But I do play them a little bit, and I just recently tried, I think Z3 is how it goes by, and it's not bad. It's also free to play, so you can give it a try if you're interested.
Yeah, though very heavy on the memory, so just keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. I think it was.
It is. I was going to mention that with Flight Simulator. It's like usually I can't keep that installed very much because it's so darn big.
Stalker's supposed to be big too, like 146 gigs. Just as an FYI, and it looks like it's gonna be worth the GBs. So.
All right, Infinite Wealth. You may have to step aside. I'm gonna play Stalker.
Yeah. Do you get Infinite Wealth on Xbox?
I do have Infinite Wealth on Xbox. I have weird kind of buckets that I put my purchases into, and the Yakuza series has wound up on Xbox for me for whatever reason. And then like all of the JRPGs, even if Microsoft randomly brings them over,
are on PlayStation.
Are on the PlayStation. Like that's just where they live in my head. They're connected to the same TV. But I also tend to skew PlayStation now because I find it a little easier to use their controller. It's just a little bit smaller.
Yeah.
And so most of my gameplay right this second is on the PlayStation.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I tend to be like, if it's usually Japanese developed, I feel like it's just more at home on Xbox, like the Resident Evil, Final Fantasy, like Armored Core, things like that. It feels more at home. And then like Western side games, I tend to be like, if it's on Game Pass, I'm gonna do it on Xbox. There, like I feel like it's just at least it makes me justify having these two machines, despite the fact that today, or was it yesterday, Phil Spencer was like, oh yeah, no red line on exclusives going forward. Okay, cool. So no need to buy an Xbox now. Cool, good to know. It's after I bought it last year for $349. Thanks, Xbox. I bet that will be a fun topic on Sunday over there on Bitcast.
I'm sure that the folks will have thoughts.
Oh yes. So Rick, that brings us to the end of the show, just like I promised you. And paint for yourself, where can people find you?
Oh sure, yeah, I'm on Twitter at HoegLaw, so you can see me talking about my Michigan Wolverines or metaphor or anything in between over there, whatever strikes my fancy. Or if you'd like something a little bit more formal, perhaps more informative, you never know on Twitter. But you can visit me on YouTube, also at HoegLaw for Virtual Legalities, Hangouts and Headlines. And certainly Bitcasts are simulcast there on Sundays, as well as on Season Gaming, which is, of course, their show. So that's where folks can find me. They can also find me, I guess, a few days before this or yesterday in time on my channel talking about the Pal World patents in my most recent Virtual Legality episode.
Yes. Will you be making the move to Blue Sky or any of these other like nascent socials like what's been happening recently?
I honestly don't know. Probably not. I only got on Twitter a few years ago, and I am not a natural social media aficionado. It's not something that I draw certainly personal self-worth from, but even kind of excitement from. So I don't know that I want to learn another set of buttons, but never say never.
Yeah, it feels like Blue Sky is like obviously post certain results from last week. It feels like a lot of people are emigrating over there, especially a lot of the SG people are like now fully over there. So I'm still keeping like my fin. It's just habit. I'm just used to Twitter at this point. I've been on Twitter since 2008. So it's gonna be a hard one to break for me in there. But and
Twitter is the only one I'm on, right? Like I can't give you my Instagram. I'm not on there. I'm not on Facebook. I'm on Twitter, and I communicate with my my friends and family on Signal, but that's not a public access point. So those are the apps that I have.
Yeah, and you don't do Discord either, right? Like or just kind of like separate.
Discord, just for like I kind of hate in terms of functionality. Like I just have difficulty with the server concept and like understanding what's new and who's talking. Like I just don't love how that whole thing operates, and that's probably just me being old. Yeah, honestly, but I've never really kind of gotten used to Discord.
Yeah, I'm a kid from the 90s, and Discord I have to keep every server that I muted because it drives me insane like how fast conversation can happen there. But I like Discord for a bunch of different stuff. But for me, you can find me at _Segovia on Twitter/X, at Segovia on Blue Sky, at Alejandro Segovia 93 on Threads/Instagram, and then my written content both at my old website, thecriticalcorner.com, and my current reviews at seasongaming.com, where you can find my reviews for The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered, Grand Blue Fantasy Relink, Skull and Bones, your favorite, Hoeg, Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, Final Fantasy 16 The Rising Tide, TMNT Mutant Arcade, which there's too many TMNT. There's the one that sucked from earlier this year, Stellar Blade, Star Wars Outlaws, my op-ed on Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2, my review for the Alan Wake 2 Lake House DLC, that was like an all-encompassing DLC review, and my review for Call of Duty Black Ops 6, and also now my review for Dragon Quest 3 HD-2D. So it's been quite the journey for this year, especially with 100+ hour games there.
That's a lot. That is a
Yes.
lot. I got to tell you, I play games all the time. I don't know that I've beaten 12
Yeah.
this year. I'm probably at like 5 or 6.
Yeah. Hey, that's still that's still a pretty good like sample, especially with some of the bigger games. Like Rebirth was like 100 hours for you, I think, too. So
I did beat Rebirth.
yes.
I did beat Infinite Wealth. Like that's a couple hundred at the top of your year.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So I yeah, and we never did a review for Infinite. Well, no one like really dove in other than like Ains there. And I was it's sad because that's one of the bigger games, but I was like in Grand Blue Land at the time. And many people,
and I have Grand Blue. I have to play more of that. It keeps losing to whatever's newish.
Yes. And that one I know that because it's an in media res kind of like game for you, but you like story. I feel like I hope the gameplay really works for you because story-wise, it feels like you got dropped into season 7 of Lost that never happened. So because there's so much backstory that it implies. But Rick, thank you so much. Now you're gonna get ready for your live stream. That's gonna be fun. I'm definitely gonna be tuning in for that one.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Well, let's see when I can get you back in for any other interesting topics. Your time and energy allowing it. But thank you so much for making your time, and everyone that's gonna listen to this episode, thank you. Or watching this episode, thank you so much for listening and watching. If you like what you saw, give us a like and subscribe. Leave a comment. Leave a fun comment for Rick here. Like give support because I know he loves promoting it. So definitely want to see like some of the people there that support, like especially his journey in recovery and his continuous coverage of this industry from an interesting perspective. So Rick, thank you so much. Keep enjoying Dragon Quest, enjoy the BL, and I'll look forward for your next appearance in the million shows that I watch that you end up just happen to be part of.
I do have a few. Thank you.
Yes, Rick, and everyone else, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the end of this month. Still like take care of yourself if you're feeling a certain way about certain things that just recently happened. Like find your support group, find something that gives you happiness. Holidays are coming soon. Play some games and press X to play. Hasta la vista, baby.